My legal update today is basically the hottest topic in real estate right now, which is the National Association of Realtors settlement in a lawsuit that was brought by a certain group of plaintiffs claiming that the way the National Association of Realtors and the multiple listing services provided for commission cooperation or commission sharing between agents violated antitrust and other fair business laws. So basically, without getting into some of the nitty gritty, and there were some pretty high powered law firms working on this thing on both sides, and so I'm going to simplify it here, but I'm sure it's more complex than what I'm going to make it. But basically, what it comes down to is sellers claimed that they should not have to offer a commission amount to the buyer's agent in order to list their property for sale in the MLS. So basically, what the rules of every MLS pretty much throughout the country were was that in order for you to list your property in the MLS, you had to provide a cooperating commission amount to the buyer's agent. Now, that cooperating commission amount could be as little as $1, although nobody ever put $1 in there. But you could put $1 in there, but you could not make that field zero. It had to have some amount listed in that field. And so there was a requirement, even if it was as low as $1, that the seller would have to pay the buyer's commission. And so those sellers said, no, that's unfair trade practices, that's antitrust. And brought a number of claims against National Association of Realtors, some large brokerages, the MLSs, and basically said, no, you can't operate this way. So they ended up prevailing and having I believe, a jury verdict in favor of the plaintiffs. And then it was appealed. And in the appeals process here, the National Association of Realtors worked out a settlement. So what does the settlement provide? Basically, the settlement provides that it will be effective sometime in July of this year. And it does really two main things. So the first thing that it does is it eliminates the field in the MLS for a cooperating commission. So you do not have to put in. There is no field. So you can't even put in an amount. You can't put even zero in that field. The field will not exist, and you do not put that in there. And then the second thing that it requires is that every buyer broker, in order to represent a buyer, must have a signed written employment agreement with the buyer. And so presently, the practice is that the buyer broker agreement is optional. If you represent a buyer, you don't have to have a buyer broker agreement. You can have basically an agreement verbally or in practice. And it really gets down to as far as your entitlement to the commission is, as the buyer broker presently, you basically are pursuing the cooperating commission amount that's being offered. So you don't have a right to get paid by your buyer currently if you don't have a buyer broker, but you have a right to be paid the cooperating commission amount. And if there's ever a dispute as to whether you're or not you're paid that, then there's a whole, mediation and arbitration proceeding on procuring cause and other things like that to figure out if you are entitled to that amount. But you don't have the law provides, as well as the, NAR ethical rules provide, that you don't technically have to have a written buyer broker in place. Well, that's all changed. Now you have to have a written buyer broker in place going forward. So what does this really all mean? There's a lot of speculation of what it's going to look like from a commission standpoint. I personally believe that how commissions are paid is, number one, going to be dependent upon market factors and forces. And then second, it's going to depend upon what a buyer broker negotiates with their client and or the seller or the listing agent. So first, as to market forces, there is nothing in the settlement that prohibits a seller from offering to pay the buyer's broker's commission as a concession. So, we've all heard of seller concessions, where the seller says, hey, buyer, you can use X amount of dollars for closing costs, for, loan origination fees, and now for buyer commissions. And so you can put that amount in the contract and have that be part of the concessions. So where does market forces or factors come in? Well, whether or not a seller is going to offer concessions is really going to be dependent upon what type of market you have. If you have a seller's market, a seller's probably not going to be as agreeable to those types of concessions. If you have a buyer's market, the seller's probably going to be agreeable to those concessions to make, their property, their purchase price, their, sale more attractive. So market factors are going to play into, ultimately who's going to be responsible for the commissions throughout the transaction. And then second, on the buyer broker side, obviously a buyer's broker is going to want to get paid. So they're going to probably put into the buyer broker agreement, or they should, if they were smart, some minimum amount that they're going to be paid at least, or maybe it's just the set amount. This is what I'm going to be paid. And that's the end of the story. And they can try to negotiate with the seller or the listing agent. If unsuccessful, the buyer has to pay that from, their funds that they bring forward at closing. Alternatively, you could see something along the lines of, look, I'm going to be paid X amount of dollars to represent you in this transaction, or whatever we can negotiate with the listing agent or the seller, whichever is greater. And so there could be a certain level of negotiation that takes place to try to increase that commission amount above the minimum amount that they've contracted to be paid by the buyer, and see if they can negotiate that. So with all that said, it is going to basically be a major shift and a major change on how commissions are handled in real estate transactions, in particular residential real estate transactions, because generally on commercial, commissions are really negotiated as part of the transaction, and there's not tons of commercial listings in the MLS. So it's really affecting the residential buyer and seller. And but look to see how this all plays out and continues to change and modify, and what practices are being used by different brokers come July of this year.